Hello, good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm a little soft-spoken, but I just want to say good evening to everyone. I see that we have some more of our community entering into the Devonshire Recreational Club right now. Just want to try and get everyone as seated as quickly as possible, such that we can commence this very important discussion this evening, so that we can engage as much feedback and share as much information as possible. It brings me great pleasure to stand before you tonight on a very serious and important community topic which will affect not only our present but future generations. And so it's very important to have each and every one of you here. I'd like to thank the party leader, Mr. Mark Bean, JP, as well as the parliamentary group who are in attendance tonight, for trying to organize this meeting so that we can share our views. Most importantly, thank you to each and every one of you that are here. At this moment, as is customary, I would like to open up in prayer so that we may set the tone and discourse for this evening. And I understand that Dr. Dorham Thompson is present and is going to lead us in prayer tonight. And so certainly we welcome the floor in that regard. Thank you very much.
If we would just bow our heads. Most gracious and eternal Father, all-wise, all-knowing God, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Dear God, we come before you this evening, your people, asking, dear God, that you will be in the midst of us tonight. We ask, dear God, that you will give us clarity of thought, clarity of deed. Dear God, you said that if we ask, it shall be given unto us. If we knock, the door shall be opened. If we seek, we shall find. And so we come tonight seeking answers to questions that we have. We ask, dear God, that every speaker will have clarity of thought and clarity of deed. Be with us in this meeting, we pray, and that all things will go according to your plan and to your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. I notice that we have our former Premier in attendance, and I just want to send honor to our former Premier. I also notice that we have news agencies present tonight, and I'd like to thank for the public discourse and the recordings that will be taken tonight. We have all our parliamentary group in attendance, and certainly want to give honor to them for the works that they are doing. I think it's fair to say that most of us all know the reason for tonight, so I don't want to hog the microphone certainly for introductions, but I do want to introduce our panel. And so before us tonight, starting from your right to left, we have the Honorable Michael Scott, JPMP, as well as the Honorable Walton Brown Jr., JPMP. We also have amongst the panel tonight a representation of our future, and that is Mr. Aaron Hill. The format for this evening is certainly going to be one where we have a very wise panel before us, individuals who are leading the charge both from the social, historical, and legal parameters concerning the issues of immigration, and certainly as they relate to the issues that are before us today as we consider the issue of permanent residency certificate holders and the granting of Bermudian status. So certainly this is going to be a very insightful and powerful discussion tonight, and your feedback is warranted. The questions are warranted and certainly necessary, and hopefully as much discourse information can be shared as possible. Now, we respectfully are going to have the panel commence with remarks to introduce the topic and to discuss why this is such an important topic, and while everyone in this country should be looking to seek balance and to have understanding in relation to this very important issue. Thereafter, we are certainly going to open up the floor for discussion from every one of you who are willing to participate, and certainly we want to try and keep the comments not brief because it is that important, but if we keep in mind set about 10 minutes in terms of looking at any kind of issues and the opportunity to answer or have questions answered, this way we can try and have as much dialogue as possible. So thank you very much for this evening, and at this juncture I'd like to pass the microphone. I believe to commence we will have MP Walton Brown Jr.
Thank you, Senator Daniels. What I'd like to do this evening is to present the issue of immigration and immigration policy in the context of the past, the present, and what we can look forward to in the future. Immigration policy has always been mired in political considerations. So immigration policy and politics have been inseparable. If you go back into our history, you can go back to the 1840s, and you will see where immigration policy and politics were intertwined. For the purposes of our discussion tonight, we're going to start with the 1960s and look at the kinds of policies that were put in place, why they were put in place, the legacy of those policies, and then bring us to the front to 2014 at the recent interpretation by Chief Justice Kawley. And my colleague, Mr. Scott, is going to go into more detail on that aspect. In 1963, Bermuda made an important step forward toward a more democratic society, because at that point, everyone was given the right to vote. Every adult who was a British subject, Bermudian, was allowed to get the vote. But one of the things about power, Bermuda, as everyone will know, was governed by an old oligarchy. Some people call it the 40 Thieves. And no one who holds power wants to lose power. So along with giving the vote, there were a number of legislative changes made. One was the voting age was increased from 21 to 25. Bermuda must be the only country in the world where the voting age is actually going up. In most places, you have a trend toward going down. But here, in 1963, it went up to 25, thinking that young people were more radical and wouldn't vote for a conservative party. Secondly, for our purposes tonight, the election requirements were amended so that anyone who was a British subject, resident in Bermuda for 3 years or more, were granted the right to vote. So those who were born and raised in Bermuda, plus anyone else who came to the island and had a 3-year residency, they were allowed to vote. What was interesting is that during this period in the 1960s, the increase in immigration was quite remarkable. Between 1950 and 1960, the net migration to Bermuda was about 800. Between 1960 and 1970, the net migration was about 8,000. And more than half of these people were from the British Commonwealth, the Caribbean, British Commonwealth, Canada, the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Australia. And so after living here for 3 years, they all got the right to vote. So that was seen by many as a clear manipulation of immigration policy for political purposes, because during the same period, the government leader, Henry Tucker, said that Bermuda was overcrowded and that we needed to find a vehicle for Bermudians to migrate overseas. And they actually began discussions with the United States government to facilitate Bermudians moving to the United States. So that issue was one that was very clearly seen as politically inspired. So much so that the only black member of the United Bermuda Party in what was then called the Legislative Council, what we now call the Senate, Mr. George Rattery, he publicly criticized the immigration policy for all of its implications and then quit the party and ran as an independent in the next election. So the 1960s was a period when we moved toward greater democracy, but there was manipulation of the immigration policy to achieve a desired political result. By 1978, though, the foreign vote, as it was called, those who resided for 3 years or more, that vote was halted so that no one coming to Bermuda after 1978 who was a British subject would be allowed to vote. But everyone who was on the voting register from the 1960s up until 1978 remained on that register and was allowed to vote. The 1970s was a period of great turmoil, as everyone would know, because of the assassination of the governor. That subsequently led to riots in 1977. And Bermuda was seen as a place where there was a great deal of contested terrain between workers and the government and the power structure. The issue of status grants became one that populated the public consciousness every so often. The government policy during the 1970s and the 1980s was that they would grant up to 40 Bermuda status grants a year. So people would apply, they had to meet certain criteria, and up to 40 were granted in any given year. Over time, by the early mid-1980s, the issue of the Bermuda status grants became very controversial because many people saw racial considerations, many people saw political considerations in this. Just one little anecdote. A friend of mine whose mother is English, he tells the story of how she received Bermuda status without applying for it. And when she received her document to say that she was not a Bermudian, she says, I don't want to be Bermudian. I love living here. My husband is Bermudian, but I've never applied for it. I don't want it. And when she sent it back, she was told by the then minister, we need your support. So there was clear political considerations. It just so happens that she's never voted. She never voted anyway. And so the intent to give her the vote in the hope that she might support a particular political party never worked because she didn't ever participate in the elections. But the controversy that surrounded the awarding of Bermuda status came to a critical juncture in 1989. In 1989, the government, the United Bermuda Party government, adopted a policy which said we would no longer allow for the discretionary grant of Bermuda status. That means while status could still be achieved through birth and through marriage, there would no longer be the opportunity for up to 40 residents to apply for and to receive Bermuda status, because the issue was so problematic politically that the government put an end to it. In 1994, there was an amendment to the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act of 1956, which was to provide a catch-all category for the small numbers of people who may have been either made stateless or completely marginalized by the policy. So a small number, and to allow for a route to Bermuda status for that number of people. That was in 1994. In 1998, of course, the Progressive Labour Party became the government, and the PLP began an island-wide consultation led by then-Minister Paula Cox, Honorable Paula Cox, an island-wide consultation on the issue of immigration and immigration reform. There were town hall meetings up and down the island just like this. And out of that meeting, there are a series of meetings, came the concept of the permanent resident certificate holder. Those people who came to Bermuda, who were here in Bermuda before July of 1989, who had the possibility of being granted status but did not have it, the government, the PLP government decided, as a gesture of sincerity and an overture toward those people who were long-term residents, the PLP created the category of PRC status. So everyone who was here before July 1st, 1989, they were able to apply for PRC status. That was to give them a measure of security. With that came certain privileges. And I say privileges as opposed to rights, because we're going to get into the issue of rights later on. The privilege was that there would be exemption from work permit categories. The privilege was that there are a larger range of properties that one could purchase, and a greater level of security of being able to apply for positions. So that was the PRC category that was put into place in 2002. The issue of PRCs and status came up in the 2007 election, when then leader of the United Bermuda Party, Michael Dunkley, made the statement that it was his party's intention to award status to PRC holders. That became a political minefield for the United Bermuda Party. It cost them votes, and the result was the result of 2007, where the PLP was returned to government. So now move to 2012. In 2012, there are only two. The two political parties shared the same position, that we accepted the position that there would be no discretionary grants of Bermuda status. The PLP called for a comprehensive review of immigration policy to create a holistic, all-encompassing approach to address a wider range of issues. The OBA position was that they did not support the grant of status to PRCs. In 2012, there was a challenge to the policy of government not to award this Bermuda status to PRC holders. As you all know, the court case in which Chief Justice Cayley ruled this year that the PRC person, when you assess their status in conjunction with the 1994 amendment to the Immigration and Protection Act, that has created, in the Chief Justice's view, a pathway to Bermuda status. This was not anticipated by anyone who created the PRC status in 2002. The policy of the two major parties was that there would be no further discretionary grant of Bermuda status, but you now have this opinion, this judgment, and a pathway created. In response to this pathway created for not less than 1,300 people, which, by the way, if all 1,300 people do in fact get Bermuda status, that will be larger than the total number of people who, if the 1989 policy was not brought into place, would have been granted status, because over 25 years, at 40 people per year, you get 1,200 people. You do the math. You get less people than you would get on 1,300. And so the point is that this 1,300 represents a larger number than the total that would have been awarded had there been a continuation of the 40 per year on an annual basis. So in response to that judgment by the Chief Justice, the Progressive Labour Party brought forward an amendment to the Immigration and Protection Act to remove the section that provided that path to status, because we had held to our position. We wanted to ensure that the OBA government held to their position. And so I met with the immigration minister, and he said, well, I might be thinking about doing something different. So we brought forth the amendment in the hope that the government would support it. They rejected the amendment, and now we have a situation where you have 1,300 PRC holders. I think there's about 1,100 spouses, and then up to 2,000 children who would be on a path to citizenship. The point about path to status, because there's no such thing, of course, as a Bermudian citizen or British citizens for now. So the issue has now arisen of one of human rights. And what's intriguing is that when you listen to the debate in Parliament, many members on the OBA side who had adopted a position of not granting status before 2012 were now saying it is a human rights issue. That's a question for us to reflect on. So what fundamental rights are being violated? As I have said on many occasions, everyone has rights, but no one's rights are absolute. And that the rights of PRC holders need to be assessed in tandem with the rights of Bermudians. And as the PLP has repeatedly called for, we want a comprehensive review of immigration policy. We want a holistic approach to immigration policy, which assesses what the rights and interests should be for Bermudians, PRC holders, and long-term residents who are not PRC holders. Because if you listen to the argument advanced by the OBA in Parliament, they were speaking about a fundamental right to the vote, essentially, for people who have lived here for a long period of time. And if you accept the logic of that argument, then there's almost no distinction to be made between someone who came before July 1st, 1989, and someone who came in August of 1989. So then you expand the pool of human rights issues and apply it to people who came after August of 1989 and who have been here for 20 years. There's human rights also that need to be addressed. Now, for those of us who are concerned about a comprehensive reform of immigration, we've called for the award of status to be suspended, to get it back in line with what has been government policy for 25 years, begin the review, and identify a holistic approach to it. Because what you see now is piecemeal. We have the Chief Justice, who I respect immensely, who has effectively created a new policy that was contrary to what had been the government position. And no government should want to have a series of policies put in place by a decision of a judge. Legislators have the responsibility to decide on the laws of the country. The courts are meant to interpret. And so you would want to have a series of laws in place and policies in place that reflect the express intent of the political leadership in the country. And that's what we have called for in the PLP. It is something in which the interests of Bermudians, which are paramount, but also the interests of PRC holders should also be addressed. And it has been presented in some ways and in some media and in some discussion groups as being an example of xenophobia. Anyone who knows me knows that I've stood against that for decades. But the more important point is that we should not allow a discussion about the interests of Bermudians to be camouflaged or derailed by accusations of xenophobia. It is a very important issue. It affects every last one of us. I guess I can end here because my other colleagues are going to speak on other aspects of it. But the issue is a fundamental issue. We need reform. We need comprehensive reform. Every country in the world has a quota system in place for how many citizenships they allow per country, per year, how many permanent residents they allow. No one does it through an interpretation by a judge. We had once had 40. This number of 3,000 or 4,000 will represent 6% of the population. Just by contrast, the largest number of people ever to be granted citizenship in 1 year in the United Kingdom was 203,000 people. That was 0.3% of the UK population. So there's a vast contrast between the two. Secondly, because I know this is an issue that the government is contemplating and reflecting on, the issue of who should be entitled to status based on birth. There are 30 countries in the world that allow for citizenship by birth. If you, sorry? The 30 out of 210 countries, sorry. There are 30 countries in the world out of 210 countries, or thereabouts, that allow for citizenship just based on birth. Canada and the United States, everyone knows that, and that's oftentimes our reference point. But Canada and the United States were countries of immigration. After they got rid of all the native people, they needed to increase their population. And so they had a policy of encouraging people to come. And for some reason, a lot of South American countries have it whereby you acquire citizenship by birth. But there is not a single European country that allows for citizenship just by right of birth. And so what's important is for us to have a shared dialogue about the best way forward, assessing a multitude of interests, because the interest is not just what are perceived as rights for one group. There are rights for Bermudians, there are rights for others as well. But we need to have that discussion. And the only way you can have that discussion is by putting the status quo ante back in place, what was in place prior to the Chief Justice's ruling, and then begin the proper and fulsome dialogue. In the absence of that, the government will just simply be accused of pandering to certain interests, trying to recreate a political landscape that prevailed in the 1960s to the detriment of the interests of the people, and that cannot be in our long-term interests. So we want pause, we want reflection, and we want fundamental reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Brown. Just wanted to make an introduction to our further panelist, MP Rolf Commission, who has joined us. I didn't have my phone to hand. And so Mr. MP Commission is going to address as well as the panel, but first we're going to have the Shadow AG, the Honorable Michael Scott, JPMB.
Thank you, Senator. Certainly to our party leader, the Honorable Mark Bean, and our Deputy Party Leader, the Honorable Derek Burgess, all of my parliamentary colleagues, to this distinguished and wholesome and healthy group of ladies and gentlemen who are interested in this subject. And I wish to recognize former Premier Donald Paula Cox and her husband, Germain. And to my fellow panel members. Of course, we're all here this evening because there are agendas by the OBA that have been building up and causing us a concern in this country, not the least of which is the question about their failure to create jobs in this country, as was the basis of their election. Commercial immigration now has been introduced as a means to address the question of this economy, and we have great concerns about it because of the impact it will have on persons who are currently out of work and have been out of work for many months, breadwinners, heads of households, single moms and dads, returning students, returning graduates. All of these things press upon us daily and have been doing so for the entire year and for the entire period of this administration, where we have seen a clear and abject failure of them to address their sorting out of the economy and addressing the question of inward investment in an critical area of hotel development, so that we can begin to be less stressed and start to see this economy and this country a place where we participate in the economy and prosper. Now, the commercial immigration agenda has been supported by this decision by the courts. A brief analysis of the decision has been that the decision is essentially of the Chief Justice is essentially and legally sound, which then drove the opposition, led by our party leader, drove the opposition to recommend that when a legal position in your country creates a loophole or creates a disadvantage to people, there should be some addressing of it, firmly and forthrightly, by the legislative branch. And this is the reason why Shadow Home Affairs Minister Brown and I got together and prepared the amendment, because we thought that this was the proper response to the Chief Justice's ruling. We debated that amendment, that opposition bill, and may I say, during the course of the last few sessions in the House, the opposition, your opposition, the PLP opposition, has been responsible for more legislative activity than the current government, with either motions or bills addressing the people's concerns, and there are others that we have been bringing forward. But there was no support for this opposition bill to simply reverse what had been found quite properly as a judicial finding on behalf of Mr. Karn and Mr. Correa, the two litigants and applicants who made an application for Bermuda status. The Chief Justice simply found, by way of a short analysis of why this loophole was created, the Chief Justice found that the Minister of Home Affairs, Minister Fahey, wrongly applied, when refusing to grant them Bermuda status, he wrongly applied the law as provided in Section 20B that Walton referred to as this catch-all provision under our Bermuda Immigration Act. He simply, the Chief Justice found that the reliance by the minister on a technicality of and a technical failure by the applicants to apply or pre-apply for Bermuda status at the same time as they were applying for naturalization was a reason or a basis for him to refuse them grant of Bermuda status. Now, the Chief Justice, that decision was looked at of the minister was looked at by the Chief Justice as unsound and one that he could not support. And it's the reason why we have the decision that says that he allowed the two applicants, I'll call them Carn and Correa, to have Bermuda status. And it is now led, as the Shadow Minister of Home Affairs has indicated, is now led to a number of applications following the path of an application for Bermuda status and a simultaneous application for British naturalization being made by numbers of people in your country, in our country, and it's going to result in a number of persons becoming Bermudians by grant of Bermuda status. Often when judge-made decisions interpret the statutes of your country and point out failures in them, failures in the legislation, it is a prime opportunity for the legislators to say, well, let's close the gap. And we have to ask the question, why hasn't there been, by the sitting government, this activity, this legislative activity? But it suits them and plays, we believe, into their desire to create more citizens. So that is the short analysis of how the Chief Justice's decision has led to persons taking advantage of the law of the land to make application for status. And the context is important, as I began at the top of my remarks. This has grave impact, and it is reflected in your presence here tonight, that you're concerned to see that your leadership, your political leadership in your country, do the right thing by you, your children, and your breadwinners at home by properly examining this whole question and where required, reversing it through legislation. Although to properly support my colleague, the Shadow Minister, it is a comprehensive review. And as I look at former Premier Cox, who knows so much about the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act, the Chief Justice even described it in this decision as a piece of legislation that is so complicated. He described it as whenever lawyers and judges approach this act, it is like you're flying blind. And it's like that. Whenever I have to advise clients about it, you have to start right from first principles. You start all over again because the act needs to be reformed. The policies underpinning the act need to be reviewed. Minister Cox of Home Affairs looked at this for the purposes of core values within the functioning of the police services. Frequently, governments need to relook at their platform of legislation and policy and make sure that it works for people. And I want to acknowledge, too, in terms of the advocacy that has been going on in our country since all of this has come up for discussion, not only my political colleagues who have been taking this matter to the people, but Ms. Sherry J., who's been doing an excellent job on the radio. Bringing the facts and the evidence to your attention so that it will have inspired and whetted your interest to come out tonight and to give us more feedback and to receive any advice that we can provide to you as to how we envisage a sound policy that is protecting and protective of you, your children, your grandchildren. The implications are wide in terms of home ownership, land ownership, education, and this is why no doubt you're here. So I will stand by with any capacity that I possess to answer any questions that arise around the decision or the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act and any of its amendments, and any discussion about proper policy formulation once that has been achieved. And with that, I hand over to the Shadow Spokesman for Human Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Shadow AG. Protocol being established, I would just like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Carmen and Belinda Cyrus, who are with us in the audience tonight. They're one of the few business owners in my constituency, and I think we need to give them the same sort of support they've been giving us over the decades in this party. The other thing about this whole audience here is that I have seldom been in a gathering such as this that has so many xenophobic Bermudians. They're all gathered in one place. So many Bermudians who hate foreigners, especially ones who do not look like themselves, and also Bermudians who do not understand what makes this economy work. As Mr. Bob Richards, the finance minister, never fails to remind us. Now, naturally, when we hear these statements, usually from people who have benefited from the type of lax, racially inspired immigration policies of a previous era, we know they are basically referring to black Bermudians. Now, let's get it. Okay, right. Thus, we have to acknowledge that there is an intersectionality, a strong connection between race and immigration on this issue. Its centrality to the issue can't be ignored. It cannot be questioned. And I will return to that further on. But firstly, it is not a surprise in my view that the current government has decided to pursue a legal strategy that they are unlikely to win in the opinion of most lawyers. It is important for them, however, as it provides a fig leaf of legality and thus political cover to an issue that is fraught with racial, political, and economic consequences for Bermuda. Imagine a long-cherished legislative and policy goal falling like the proverbial manna from heaven. It's almost biblical. I am sure that the thousands, perhaps, and more largely white and Anglo PRC holders who have been here prior to 1989 must feel as if Jesus himself has answered their prayers. Note the 2007 election and Pat Gordon-Pamplin's dropping of the ball. Remember the final 2 or 3 weeks of the campaign when she let the cat out of the bag by asserting that they intend to do what is happening now by making sure that these long-term residents and PRC holders were going to get status. It was my opinion then that provided that final additional margin of victory that resulted in the Progressive Labour Party's victory in that 2007 election. There was no doubt in my mind that once the ruling from the Chief Justice was revealed, there was no turning back for the government on this issue, despite the fact that they stated before the election that they had no intention of granting status to PRC holders. So much for election promises. In that context, then, the decision not to support the opposition PLP's bill to close the notorious loophole known as 20B2B by way of the relevant Immigration Act is no surprise whatsoever for those of us who do not wear rose-colored glasses. And in fact, the governor has already granted nationality status to 150 PRC applicants. The first step in a two-step process, as my colleagues have pointed out, which will culminate in status once we assume the legal challenge is rejected on the part of the appeal court, as many expect. After that, it'll be full steam ahead for Minister Fay and his government to grant status to the affected PRC holders. A decision to join with the PLP opposition to support our bill would have been consistent with the law passed in 1989. Again, my colleague has addressed that, which banned discretionary grants of status after significant protest around this issue to the perceived multi-decade abuse of that discretion by successive UBP governments. Mr. Sanderson, the lawyer in question, he must be a hero right now. I suspect that there are posters going up in people's homes. Some may be even putting up shrines to this man. He has even advocated that the government should grant the children and grandchildren of PRC holders status as well now, not some distant place, time in the future. Now, at this point, I have to offer some disclosure. We have former Premier Cox here, and as Minister Cox in the early 2000s, I participated in a panel as the PLP government was prepared to do the right thing for long-term residents, many of whom are Portuguese descent, which established this whole PRC regime. And again, the long-term, what was it called? That the government has also rescinded the term limits policy. All that came out of that to create a suite of legislative and policy initiatives that would balance the needs and legitimate aspirations of Bermudians in their own country with the concern about these people who have been here for a long time in our society. And so the PLP attempted to do the right thing. Now, turning just very quickly, more specifically to the issue of that, I talked about the intersectionality between race and immigration in Bermuda. If Bermudians and our foreign guests wish to understand why many of the Bermudians in this room and throughout the country, particularly those over 40 years of age, are less than sanguine or happy about their prospects with respect to this issue, one need only consider the following. How many in the audience were aware, for example, that in 2003's election, that 52% of white Bermudians who were eligible to vote were foreign born? Can you put up your hand? How many were aware of that? 52%. That percentage may have fallen somewhat over the last few years. After all, many of them have had children. So over the last 10 years since that election in 2003, we may have seen it drop by a point or two. Similarly, I want to ask another question. How many of you are aware, as chronicled by Mr. Walton Brown, my colleague, in his book, recently published, that over 6,000 persons of largely British and Anglo descent migrated to Bermuda during the 1960s alone? Put your hand up. How many are aware of that? Many of whom are still with us today. In fact, I suspect that a significant percentage of the aforementioned 52% would have been part of that wave. Now, these would have been people who came into Bermuda, these migrants back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, coming from places like Great Britain, Canada, the former dominions of the British Empire, South Africa, former colonies that were now going towards independence, Kenya and the rest. That is the Bermuda that myself and my parents back in the 60s and 70s were confronting as we tried to democratize this country. The question we have to ask is, what is the value of the Bermudian birthright? The 52% figure and thousands of people who achieved status prior to 1989 indicates that the value of that birthright has already been diminished. Oh yeah. For my generation and my parents' generation, that birth rate has already been diminished. We're only arguing now and having this issue being raised as to whether we will allow it to be diminished and devalued even more. I contend that it has also led to a palpable underdevelopment in the modern era of a significant component of Bermuda's population, particularly with respect to its black population. Moreover, will the granting of status to thousands more or further devalue that birth rate even more at the expense of present and future generations and further inflame racial tensions and discord? In the immediate aftermath of World War II, Bermuda was not alone in promoting immigration policies which reflected a strong racial and racist bias. Canada and Australia had white-only immigration policies that lasted until the late 1960s or 70s. And in the case of Australia, they would not just accept any white immigrant. Australia had a policy that, at least initially after the war, that they would only accept Anglo-Saxon or British immigrants. So, I mean, you know, they were extreme. Bermuda's policies, which resulted in the flooding of the country, I want to use the term again, the flooding of the country with largely white Anglo migrants from the US, Canada, South Africa, and from other colonies in Africa and beyond, who were after 1968 fast-tracked to status, was driven by one significant historical event, and that was the adoption of universal adult suffrage as the model for future elections in Bermuda. They also became the dominant group within the United Bermuda Party before its demise, and now are the dominant group within the OBA. I repeat, in 2003, 52% of white Bermudians eligible to vote were foreign-born. These were two outcomes that the white Bermudian community were seeking to avoid. And those outcomes, there were two outcomes, I should say, that the white Bermudian community were seeking to avoid, which were already evident in the Caribbean after the advent of universal adult suffrage. Number one, beginning in the late 50s, growing numbers of black colonies, or English colonies rather, in the region have begun to move toward black majority governments, made possible by universal adult suffrage being implemented throughout the region. And two, as was occurring in the Caribbean, those black majority governments beginning in the early 60s through to the 70s began to successfully take their countries directly to independence. That was the blueprint in the Caribbean, and I contend that this blueprint was what stoked the dominant fear of Bermuda's white community, which led to the types of abuses which have been abundantly chronicled, and which I contend still inform so much that is occurring in this regard today, although largely unacknowledged. Yet, of course, those who have benefited from this social and racial injustice, because that's what it was, that was Bermuda during that period, are unconcerned and refuse to understand that their presence here was a direct result of unwritten, de facto racist policies that privileged them at the expense of my father and mother's generation, and indeed my own. These are the stories that they will never tell their children. In closing, this issue once again asks of us, what kind of country do we seek to become? Will we continue to be a country divided by these racial and economic divides, or will we be a country that heals the divisions that have been created, not by its victims, but by those who have benefited from those divisions? The Progressive Labour Party has always sought to have the question posed by the presence of thousands of long-term residents ultimately resolved by way of a constitutional conference, when Bermudians resolved to become an independent nation and establish full and comprehensive citizenship for Bermuda. Something which status is not, despite the constant conflation of the two terms, that being citizenship and status, even among people who should know better. I spoke earlier of the underdevelopment of Bermuda's population, particularly its black population, by way of these trends over the last 6 decades. Immigration trends have played a major role in perpetuating the divide and now the growing development gap between black and white in Bermuda. And the failure of this government to arrest the conscious policy drift toward a major liberalization of status grants in Bermuda again will unleash another cycle similar to that of the previous era. This will only further marginalize native Bermudians and ensure that the separate and unequal status that characterizes Bermuda will become more entrenched. That will change, however, if those persons obtain status. They will be elevated to a pool of candidates that will again, as mentioned, perpetuate another cycle of marginalization of native Bermudians in this country. Now, we firmly believe that we must protect Bermuda's birthright and its remaining value for all of us. We also believe that the key to a sustainable Bermuda for white and black Bermudians is a Bermuda in which invests in its people and does not treat them as surplus to requirements. Is this too much to ask of a country's birthright? We think not. We failed to arrest these policies fully in a previous era. For the sake of our futures, let us not make that same mistake again. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, just want to thank all of the panelists thus far. We've had 3 politicians who have been loyal servants to the Progressive Labor Party give various approaches into this very important issue. And by way of reintroduction, I would like to take the opportunity again to remind those who are new walking inside of the Devonshire Recreational Club tonight, Mr. Aaron Hill. My initial remarks were that he is a representation of our future. And so this is one of those proud moments where certainly I've had the pleasure to watch him grow, both in stature in his former duties as a youth parliamentarian, as well as his aspirations in the courts. And this is a very articulate, humble gentleman, and certainly the mindset of our future. So with those remarks, thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I've made it a paramount priority of mine to be a voice for the youth. I grew up, I apologize. I've made it a paramount priority of mine to become a voice for the youth. I grew up as a young man, 13, 14 years old, writing letters to the editor. Often thought as odd by my classmates and said, why do you do that? I said, well, I'm interested in it because it's going to affect me one day. And I've sort of, as of late, started to network with the youth and make sure that they stay in touch with the issues of today because they affect us, the leaders of tomorrow. How do the youth feel? That's a question that's always asked of me. The youth do see the broken promises. The youth are concerned that this government is disingenuous and don't take the youth very seriously. They are concerned with the transparency or the lack thereof. I refer to 2007, pre-election, where the now Honourable Premier and then Opposition Leader, Mr. Michael Dunkley, stated that he promised PRC 8,000 PRC holders status. I then take you to 2012 pre-election, where the same gentleman, our Honourable Premier, then Opposition Leader, promised that he, or denied rather, that he would grant PRC holders. What this country needs is not wishy-washy, one year this and another year that, but we need firm leadership for Bermuda. I give you the example of when we board an airplane and they tell you, if we have the unfortunate circumstance of landing in the ocean, that little bag, that little mask is going to come down. But there's something important that they tell you about that mask. They tell you to take care of yourself first and then help the person next to you. And that's why I believe that Bermudians should come first in Bermuda. Having said that, however, I do empathize with the PRC holders. They have made a way of life here. They have lived here for over 30 years. And they, rightfully so, feel as if they deserve some rights. I'm rather young, and forgive me if I'm wrong. I think I'm correct that it was this party, the Progressive Labor Party, that assured that they had some rights. As a young person, I can appreciate the position that we find ourselves in with regard to this immigration issue. It has provided us, or I don't see it as a problem necessarily. I don't see it as a problem necessarily, but an opportunity. An opportunity to see our people work together with our parliamentarians and the PRC holders. It is an opportunity to assess the legislation and allow the legislature to express their intent and not the courts. Although some may be opposed to the interpretation of the Honourable Chief Justice, it is his interpretation of the law. But the law should not be determined on the interpretation of, with the greatest degree of respect, our Chief Justice, but rather the intent of our parliamentarians, the people that are put in place to represent the views of the people, elected to uphold the views of the people. It's an opportunity to see who will stand up to protect the birthright of Bermudians and those who will sell it out. Let's look at some of the disadvantages from a youth perspective. As a young man, I'm only 18 years old. And so, I find myself amongst a peer group that are preparing to go away to university. Some, or maybe all of us, will be familiar that this government cut back scholarships. Now, how does this relate to the immigration issue? Well, the lawyer, Mr. Peter Sanderson, has come to the conclusion that if this is the correct way, the children and the grandchildren should also be given status. This means that they will be competing with us, born Bermudians, for the right to vote, the right to buy property, and now we'll have an increased pool for scholarship contentions. The difficulty that us as young people have is that it now creates a social divide. These are our friends. These are our buddies. We don't look at each other as, I'm a born Bermudian and you're a PRC holder. We don't look at it as that. And it's unfortunate that the government is willing to let us continue in this situation. I have to disagree with Mr. Commission because I don't believe that xenophobia, I don't believe that standing up for Bermuda and her people is xenophobia. That notion doesn't even make for good nonsense, in my humble opinion.
You mean you disagree with those who say that?
Absolutely, with those that say that. That xenophobia is that. Now, the OBA has denied that they will allow PRC holders to gain status pre to this election. But now we find ourselves in the position where these people are on the verge of gaining status. And what has our government chosen to do? To deny a bill that would allow us the opportunity to sit back, not rush and make a decision because there is no one solution, but to sit back, communicate with the people of this country, the PRC holders, let's unite and allow the legislature, the parliamentarians, to come up with something that can help us work together, not create a divide. I do not believe, as I've stated, that there is one solution, one fits all. However, I do support the position that we should suspend the process of these applications, assess the situation, and allow the legislature to do what they were elected to do. The OBA has allowed 155 applications to get processed for neutralization. That's the first of two steps. Now, from a young person's perspective, we see or we hear that there may be motives for that. For me personally, I'm not going to address that. You may feel that they're doing it for a certain intent or for a certain purpose, but the fact of the matter is, Martin Luther King once said, the time is always right to do what is right. And I believe the time to stand up for Bermuda, her people, and their birthright is now. Having said that, the young people of Bermuda see what is going on. We see the current government making decisions or not making decisions. We see the current government assessing different issues or not assessing different issues. We see the current government making promises but then ignoring them when they're broken. As young people, we do not like to be taken lightly. I have found that me standing up and speaking for young Bermudians, they often come to me and they say, hey, what's this about? And we have a talk about it. The fact of the matter is they are interested and they do care because the decisions that are made today affect us, the youth of tomorrow. Now the question must be asked, given the disadvantages that I've stated, us having to fight for scholarships, compete with non-Bermudians for scholarships, the right to vote, the drastic change in a voting demographic. Now, having said that, the young people of Bermuda do feel that something has to be done, and it has to be done now. We're going to allow these applications to be processed when you previously denied that you would allow that to be done. What does that show the youth of Bermuda? That you can promise her people something and do another thing? I just urge the government of the day to do what is right, because as Martin Luther King said, the time to do what is right is always right. I didn't get that right. I'm not doing him his pride. The time to do what is right is always no. Thank you.
Thank you to all of the panelists who have participated for the night. At this juncture, certainly what we want to do is make sure that your participation is equally measured, appreciated, and valued. And so at this juncture, I'll be coming around the room with, I see the first hand already, with questions, comments. What we just ask is that everything is from a spirit of unity and a spirit of Bermuda first. So with those remarks, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Good evening, panel, and politicians, and to the rest of the audience here. My name is Cliftine Lambert. I'm a teacher of 25 years. I've worked at child development and many other realms of the education department. I think what we need to do right now is stand up and give this young man a standing ovation, please. I have had the opportunity to be blessed to mentor a young man who's 24 years old. He's the father of 2. Fortunately, through his experiences in his life, he's learned that his pants come above his waist. Many of our black young men wear the mask. They feel they are tough and they are strong, but they are hurting. He's gone out to look for work, and he's told, we cannot hire you. We are not giving our young black men enough praise, okay? He's caught between a rock and a hard place because he wants to go out to work, but yet he feels they're not going to hire me. So his self-esteem is low. The women in his life are not giving him the praise. So he feels like a deadbeat dad, and so he fluctuates between, I want to go out and look for work, yet I'm going to lay in a phlegmatic state. Where are they? They're not here. I don't know how to bring them here. Emotionally, psychologically, as black men, they have been conditioned with the mind that they are failures already. So we need to impose upon them continuous praise. If you tell your husband, you are such a good man, you are so kind to me, he will be kind to you. He will be loving to you. The women in his life, this young man, are not giving him the praise and the motivation. And we're finding this in many families in this island. What we're to do, I don't know. But we need to do something because we have a young man here. And we need many more young men here. And the reason they're not here is because of fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Lambert. I see some further hands in the back. I'm just going to make my way around the room. Excuse my reach.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I happen to be called today by Pearl Ryan John Smith. But during my, okay, didn't hear me. I'll start off. Today I am known around Bermuda as Ryan John Smith. But when I was born, I was crucified with the name, I said crucified, with the name Ewan Randolph Davis. I bear that name to a young man, age 18 years old. I was 18 years old. I went out one evening and thought I was having fun. Somehow I got attacked by a trail man, and somehow now the society find a way to charge me for causing death of one individual, which I don't claim to that I did up to today. And I ended up in prison. I came out of prison. I voted a couple times. Then the jealousy got around that I have been in prison. I shouldn't have the privilege to vote. So they took me off the voting list. And after 50 years, listen, I said, after 50 years, they came to me and said, the parole board. I said, what? Listen, we would like for you to inform me what you went in prison for, because we cannot find no record. So you were not able to participate in any activity of this island and voting or anything like this. So I said, okay, after 50 years. So I said to them, I've been wondering when I was going to be able to play in this team, like the United States have baseball, and they have a game that we all like to listen to and see, the World Series. And not knowing that the World Series team, the way it was informed her, the OBA got in power, and they formed that same world team. They got tourism board, and the just can't get it out. But they got 3 boards govern them. They don't make no decisions, but they got 3 other boards that making all decisions for the governor of the day. And when they're making the decisions, they're making the decisions against us. I'm saying this because I don't know what we're going to do, and you all politicians up there is doing a good job trying to offend us, but I think we have to offend ourselves. We need to come together like we did in 1959 during the boycott and protest. Go to Government House. Go to Government House and say that we are not satisfied with the government. We need to say unconfident government. We need to go and do that. Not to come here, not to that, but go to Government House, not up the House Assembly, the Government House, and say we are not satisfied with this government of today.
Right. Thank you. Let me just say one thing. In your concluding remarks, you've hit the nail on the head. We're here tonight as part of a first stage in developing a campaign to achieve suspension of status grants until we can have that full and proper review of immigration policy. So I don't want anyone to think that the Progressive Labor Party and young Mr. Hill are here simply to have talks. Talks need to lead to action. And we are here committed. We're committed to an agenda. And we begin the process in an attempt to pass on information to you to increase consciousness provide information, mobilize people. Under our leader, we may decide on other meetings in the future, and I leave that up to Honorable Leader Bean to make that decision. But this is just a first step. And none of us here enjoy simply talking, although it's nice to raise these issues with it. We want to act. And so be assured that this is the initial step to what will be a focused campaign to achieve a clear objective. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Walter Lister, and I've seen this picture before. I've seen this identical same picture before. I was elected to Parliament almost 40 years ago for this Progressive Labour Party. And when I was elected, the 3-year residency vote was very much in force. And in 1979, there was a conference held, a constitutional conference held at the Warwick Camp, and I was a delegate for the Progressive Labour Party. And we dealt with a number of issues, and one issue was removing the 3-year residency vote. And it was the last day of the conference, getting toward the evening, and this matter came up very forcefully. Lewis Brown Evans, Freddie Wade, Gene Cox, and Walter Roberts, and a number of persons were there, politicians of a former era. And they were very concerned about what was happening with this 3-year residency vote. And it was our intention to remove it. The United Bermuda Party, led by David Gibbons, wasn't having any of it. The chairman of the day was Richard Posnett, who eventually came back to Bermuda as a governor. And he probably saw the injustice in the act as it was. And because the Progressive Labour Party and the United Bermuda Party couldn't come to a consensus, he suggested that late afternoon that we take this matter to London to the Foreign Secretary to look at the matter. Because the UBP were not having any of this. And the OBA, the present party, the policies are identical. They are identical. There's no change. And what I'm saying is that they went to London. Dame Lewis Brown Evans went to London, and also David Gibbons went. And the decision by the Foreign Secretary was it was unfair, and it was removed, and he gave a date by which it had to be removed. What I'm seeing right now is a replay of that whole thing again, in a different manner. But the principle is the same. Not protecting the born Bermudian. It's nothing wrong with protecting Bermudians. That's our responsibility. That's our total responsibility. I just wanted to say that. A number of things I'd like to say, but time is short, and everybody should have an opportunity to speak. But I thought I would like to say, I've seen this movie before. I know exactly where it's going to go, and I'm supporting you 100%. I've been around for a long time. But as long as I've got life and strength and health, I'll be here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lister.
Thank you, Elder Statesman Lister.
Just in response to what Mr. Lister said, Michael and I, we actually went to Government House to try to persuade the governor to do the honorable and right thing and not approve all these applications for naturalization. And the governor was very short and basically said, if they meet the criteria, then he's going to sign off on all the naturalizations. And of course, that's the precursor to the award of status. And we explained to the governor, we attempted to highlight to the governor that there are likely to be dire consequences in him doing this, and that was his position. You want to add anything to that, Michael?
No.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for hosting this forum. I really appreciate the opportunity to learn more and also to speak to this topic. And I'm speaking just for myself, not on behalf of any organization or any nationality. My name is Tiago Garcia, and I happen to be a PRC holder. My Bermuda story started in the early 1970s when my grandfather moved here, and then my father moved here in the early 1980s, and then when I was 3, my sister, myself, and my mother moved here in January of 1990. 1990? Yep. And I attended the school system in Bermuda, Harrington Sound, Whitney, Mount St. Agnes, went over to CSU University, and upon returning to Bermuda, got involved in some really interesting things. I volunteered for Her Majesty's Regiment, was also recognized by the Center on Philanthropy for a lot of youth recruitment programs. I also worked for the Department of Energy for 2 years and co-wrote Bermuda's first national energy policy. Worked really closely with Minister Michael Scott, who's one of my favorite people, who's a great person. And it was under a PLP administration. It was a great project. I'm currently working out of the Chustick Foundation as director of the Community Art Program, and you know, proud of a lot of these accomplishments, and they're all done while having a clean criminal record, which I give myself a pat on the back for. But as it stands, I still can't apply for Bermudian status unless married to a Bermudian female for over 10 years. So if there's any single ladies here. Yeah, okay. Sorry, you can get me when, anyway. I'm just here to state that I know it's a sensitive topic, granting status to PRC holders. And I just request that we're looked at as humans and not merely statistics, as we're members of the community. And despite growing up in a low middle class neighborhood, being our PRC holder restricts me to purchasing property, high-end property with no option of rental income. I cannot vote in the place that I call home, therefore I don't feel like I live in a democracy most days. I have a disincentive to fall in love with a non-Bermudian because I can't pass residency rights on to my kids. The acronym PRC for me stands for Permanently Restless Citizen. That's what it stands for most days. I'm really happy to be here and proud to be of the community, but it can be a bit difficult sometimes when you hear a lot of rhetoric, especially ones with regards to PRCs having less of a Bermuda connection. I don't expect the situation to change. I'm not here asking for anything. I just want everyone in the room to understand that most of us really care deeply about Bermuda. We've worked and continue to work to create and not take away opportunities from Bermudians. And most of all, we just want to obtain the feeling of belonging and community. So, thank you.
Thank you. If I can just respond to your comment, because this is exactly why we need to have a comprehensive review of immigration policy. This is exactly why we need it. And we cannot allow for an interpretation by a judge to create the new scenario by which status is accomplished. Now, everyone who came to Bermuda after 1989, everyone who stayed in Bermuda, who was here before July 1989, stayed after, they knew that there was no possibility of getting status. That was the clear policy. It was the PLP government that made the first overture toward a greater level of security by creating the category of PRC. That was a humane decision by a party that actually cares about people. And the party throughout its history has cared about people. Not even people who are necessarily Bermudian, because if you look at the record of Lois Brown Evans and the cases that she argued and so forth, so there's a very clear track record of this party in helping the average man or woman. That's our reason for being. And sometimes it transcends issues of nationality. So what we want to do is look at what is the best structure so that someone who has been here since age 3 you said? Right. What is the appropriate policy for dealing with people in that category? What is the appropriate policy going forward for people who come after that? Because if you listen to the rhetoric coming out of the OBA, they will give status to every single person who's been here for any number of years, and now they want to give the Job Makers Act, and this reinvented Job Makers Act is such a biased piece of legislation. Who does it give PRC status to? Senior executives. Who are senior executives? Rich white men. That's all it is. It contradicts the Constitution, which says you should not have laws in place that have the effect of giving preferential treatment to people based on race or nationality. And so what we're saying is that the party genuinely feels for people who are in a plight, as you are in, but we cannot be forced into a position by a piece of an interpretation of a legislation when, as many people have said on this panel, the policy should be a deliberative decision, a conscious decision by those in power after considering a multitude of issues, one of which will be those who have been here since almost birth. It's a very real, heart-wrenching issue. And so it has to be addressed. We can't ignore it. But the track record of the PLP has shown that we have been the pioneers in humanitarian approaches to our policies and our legislation. All you have to do is look at it. Look at the track record. We have never manipulated immigration policy for political purposes. We haven't. Those who hold power now and their predecessors have certainly used immigration policy for political purposes. And so we want a humane approach, but it has to be comprehensive. It cannot be piecemeal, and it has to take all variables into account. And as my honorable member, Mr. Lister, said, Bermudians have to come first in their own country. We shouldn't apologize for that. You should never apologize for that. But we also have to take into consideration what rights and what privileges we're going to give to other people who've been here for long periods of time. It is a conversation we have to have. And the way it's being directed now, you're going to create a wall, you're going to create opposition, when what we need is a collaborative approach to address a very sensitive issue. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I just have a question for the young man. This isn't what I really want to say. I really want to say something totally different, but this is the questions. You said you came here when you was 3. Have you ever been back home to... No. Okay. So are you willing to renounce your citizenship?
Well, you know...
Not simple. It's a simple question. Do you... you've been here since you're 3.
Yeah.
Would you renounce your citizenship?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
You would?
I know.
So
well, it's an interesting. Well, you know, every case is different. But you know, if you're going to tell me that, yeah, no, listen, it's some context. Like my comprehension of the English language is a lot better than my comprehension of the Portuguese language. I mean, I feel more Bermudian. I've lived in Bermuda. I have my friends are Bermudian. My school teachers are in here. My colleagues are in here. My community is in this room. So if that was the ultimatum, then yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Good evening, everybody. I'm just piggybacking on Mr. Garcia. My situation is a little different from Mr. Garcia. I was born here in August '89 to non-Bermudian parents, but however, my 2 siblings who are older than me are both Bermudian, and I am now raising a Bermudian child. So I feel that it's very unfortunate that I am not allowed, or I wasn't able to obtain Bermudian status when I was born, just a few weeks after the cutoff date. And I was in school here all my life. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I work, I pay my dues, and I'm all for making a Bermuda, doing the right thing. Like I said, I'm now raising a Bermudian child. So I feel like in my case scenario, then like the gentleman said, it should be case by case. I've been denied twice Bermuda status, despite the fact that I do have 2 Bermudian siblings and now a Bermudian child. So like, it's very unfortunate. This is my home. I have never been or lived in Portugal. I have that citizenship due to my parents. So I just hope that when push comes to shove, that it is a case-by-case decision, so that I can be granted status to a place that I've known, and I call home.
Thank you. I'm just going to respond, and I'll let someone else respond. So I don't want to hog the mic here. But let me just say, ma'am, in response to your situation, that is precisely why when you do this comprehensive reform, you would see that there's something arbitrary almost between those who were here before July 89 and those who came after, like yourself. One of the guiding principles, I think, is accepted in most countries, and which I will be happy to explore accepting in Bermuda, because I think it makes sense, is that one of the principles that immigration policy should be guided by is that it should not be fragmenting families. It's a very simple humanitarian approach. And so your situation, you don't even fall into the PRCs who could get status because you came after July 89. But in terms of a humanitarian approach, when we have this comprehensive review, the fact that you have children who are Bermudian and your siblings are Bermudian, then if you accept the principle that families should not be fragmented, then the options really are very clear in your respect to your situation. Did anyone else want to comment on that? Or?
It's very much like the Fisher case.
Yeah. Sorry, exactly. It's like the Fisher case, which Julian Ho argued in the 1970s, which I guess people are nodding, so a lot of people know. And the principle was that you should not have families fragmented by immigration policy.
Waiting on me? Yeah. The gentleman up there, Mr. Aaron Hill is your name?
Yes, sir.
I want to congratulate you for surviving to be here, to be amongst us today. The reason why I say that, in 1959, I'm 65 years of age. In 1959, there was a family planning program put into place. Now, I have done a lot of research on it, newspaper clippings, all sorts of stuff, because I took an interest in that. Now, that family planning thing was directed at one particular segment of the community. It was discussed. Matter of fact, Dr. Simon Fraser, in a sense, stated that. Okay? Now, in the United Nations Charter, or part of it, or as far as dealing with genocide is concerned, it says in there that any birth control program directed at any particular segment of any one particular society is considered genocide. Now, the biggest excuse you heard today is that the population of Bermuda is shrinking. Isn't that right? Now you got to ask yourself how that happened. Okay? Today. And that you hear them saying that now. We got to bring them in. Bring them in. Because Bermudans are shrinking. We're dying. We're not making enough babies. So I would like for you, any one of you gentlemen up there to address that connection. Because the United Nations say it. That any form of birth control or family planning directed at any particular group or in a community is considered genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Miss, you want to
Thank you, Brother Stovall. Those are passionate views that you're expressing, and we don't need to do anything else other than confirm that theory and thesis. It is quite right. And there's a genocidal policy happening even within the national security and loss of our young men on the streets from gun violence. These are other ways that there is a genocidal presence in our country. So I hear your analysis from the United Nations, and it is amongst the grave concerns that this current OBA policy is adding to our stress and concern, and is the reason why we're here. So I endorse, I don't mind how you characterize it, but we've reached the point where enough is enough, and it's not surprising that it's being now re-characterized and repackaged by members of this community in such grave terms as genocide. But we must keep our heads. I remember when then Minister Cox was dealing with that issue that dealt with acknowledging human rights, and we pressed on with the PRC policy. We did it for all of the good reasons, just as Aaron has said. We went right, was ready then, and we proceeded. And we must press on, and we must press on with firmness. We mustn't be, and my caucus colleagues have been advised and galvanized by the party leader to be firm and not to shrink back. And we will do that. You have our commitment on that. But we'll be rational. This is why you have the legal minds here in the party involved in shaping any needed laws to support any sensible, rational policies that the Shadow Home Affairs Minister will be advocating. Thanks.
Can I just add one other point? Because when you got up, Mr. Stafford, talked about the UN, I actually thought you were going to talk about a different resolution. The resolution that I think really applies to Bermuda relates to a resolution taken in the 1960s that said any attempt by an administering power to manipulate the population for political purposes was to be condemned. And the most explicit example of a colonial power manipulating the population for political purposes was in the French territory of New Caledonia, where they sent so many French nationals over to New Caledonia. When they had their referendum on independence, the amount of French citizens who had gone there and who could participate in the referendum outnumbered the locals. And so the referendum failed. If you support independence, it failed and led to extensive civil unrest. We don't have quite the same consequence in Bermuda, but when you have a history of an immigration policy designed to manipulate the racial makeup for political purposes, then it resonates. And so when we come to have a proper decision about independence, and we will, a proper decision, the question becomes, to what extent will those who hold citizenship in another country, who were not born in Bermuda, be able to determine the outcome? And when you have a minority, when I say minority, let's get it clear so there's no misrepresentation. When you have a minority number of people, a small number of people, able to determine the outcome, that's a minority veto. And so it's a serious issue for those of us who want to see Bermuda advance constitutionally. And so the other issue about further status grants without a consideration of what we're going to do about our constitutional position is very important. And we haven't come to that stage yet, but we need to have that conversation along with the conversation about the nature and extent of immigration reform.
Just before you come, Rolf, Bermuda can be a leader on this whole question as a overseas territory. We've been put in the position of being leaders on the whole question of how overseas territories should shape the economy for its people. But what is a concern, and I want you to be concerned about it as well. I mean, we look at some Caribbean territories where this commercial immigration is being promoted. And we see the situation, particularly from my analysis in Cayman Islands, where Caymanis are barely valid in their own country. And if we're to be leaders, we're the largest overseas territory on this front. And if we have a government that is going to take us down a dark path when we should be leading on this front, it is something that we should be very concerned about. I don't want us to be a kind of Cayman Island where Bermudians are marginalized out of existence. And if you look around the internet, you'll see situations where there'll be examples in St. Kitts. So all of these places are experimenting with commercial immigration, and our current leadership is adopting these as rationales for adopting it here. And it's not leading. We should be leading.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure once again to be in a meeting such as this. I've been in many of them. Sometimes, you know, we get so caught up in meetings that we take our eyes and we lose sight of the target. Sometimes we lose sight of the very thing that's fueling the situation. And we must never lose sight of what's fueling our situation that brings us here this evening. We've heard it from the panel tonight, but I wonder how many of us have really caught it. One word, race. That is what is fueling this whole situation. And it just galls me, you know, when I hear elder Bermudians saying we've never had race in this island before. We always got along so well together. I've been around since 1927. And I would like to know what days these people are talking about when they say they never experienced racial divide in this country. I've seen it and I've experienced it all my life. And it has been used to keep our people back and under control. Let me give you one example. About 60 years ago, I was a security officer in one of the well-known hotels. It was a bicycle which was abandoned in some bushes on the property. Had been laid there for months. A young boy come along and one night he decided that he might be able to salvage some parts of it. One of the security officers caught him, took him to before the manager. He was a black little boy, teenager. The manager says, call the police. That was one incident. A few weeks after that, the manager's wife was missing money from her room. We decided to set a trap. The security chief stayed in the room during the dinner hour. This was when it was all happening. It happened several times. And while he was there, the window opened. This person got in the window, went direct to this lady's drawer, pulled out her handbag, gripped the money from the handbag. That's when the security chief put his hand on the shoulder. Took him before the manager. The manager looked at him, called his parents. He was a white boy. So you see, that is what is happening and has been happening in this island for years. I've seen the times I've walked in a restaurant in Bermuda. You can buy it here, but you can't eat it in there. You'll have to take it out. You talk about race, I've been through it. And what's fueling the situation today is race. Don't let personalities take you off your course. It's not that I'm unsympathetic to those that have been here for quite a while and like to state their case. They have an argument. But we cannot let personalities get in the way of progress. Don't let our sympathies get in the way and stop us from doing what we know and what we've known for years, what we must do. And with that, I think I'll sit down.
I'm afraid of Auntie.
Good evening, everyone. I've had the opportunity to be mentored via a book by the name of Second Class Citizen, First Class Men. And Dr. Eva Hudson made a very important statement inside of this book. She stated that the situation of that time, back in 1963, or from 1948 to 1963, needed two hands. One hand would be the legislation. The other hand would be the people protesting. Getting together, these two hands working together would have changed a whole lot more back in 1963. Like the gentleman just said, let us not sleep on the personalities, because this is how they've always got the upper hand. That's right. They were saying one thing over here, distracting you over here, but his left hand is doing something over there. We cannot sleep to what is happening. This has happened before, like Mr. Lister said, okay? And the way that they get us is by smiling, but in the other case, now let's remember, apples don't fall too far from the tree. These are the descendants of the same people that bought or tried not to bring about universal franchise. And when it was brought about, it was underhanded and it undermined the people at that time. And those people are you and me. We are the descendants of those people, and some of those people are still here, as we know. We cannot sleep, people. Cannot. Okay? Yes, Brother Minister Scott, we have to be rational. However, rationality also has another air to it. And I implore our leader, Mark Bean, this cannot be the first and last time this is going to be said at a meeting like this. This has to go nationwide. Brother Pawalu Komarofego, also known as Roosevelt Brown, went from St. George's to Dockyard, speaking about universal franchise. That man has passed. But I know, in the spirit of him and Dame Lois, we have to remember what it took and what it takes to be men and women. And that is to stand up at the time that is happening. We cannot continue to talk, because I've watched talking all my life. Okay? I'm 45 years old. I need my grandchild, who turns 5 this year, to have the same rights and privileges, even more so in advance than what I'm experiencing today. And I have to say this, just because we're able to sit in the bus, eat at a restaurant, go to a movie, be in a hospital, does not mean that you have success as a citizen of Bermuda. We went to sleep when that happened. We did, because we thought we had arrived, but we don't. We haven't. We still don't have equitable economic status. I don't know about most people in this room, if you own your own business. How many of you work for somebody else that is not of your ilk? And most people go to work unhappy. Your life is meant to be happy, lived happily, loving your children when you want to love them, your grandchildren. We have to look at those rights, inalienable rights, as Bermudians. Okay? Once again, we can have sympathy because we are empathetic people, but that's what gets us too. We've got to be mindful of that. Because we have been trained and conditioned based upon our hearts. But we have to remember that there's another side to ourselves, and that's our intelligence. Working in balance and in tandem will bring about results. So as much as rationality goes, we have to not stop. I'm not sure at the end of this program if you're going to have people sign anything, but this is needed. We all need to come together again. We need to take a stand somewhere in the public's eye. I have not been to a public meeting like this forum in a while, and I'm not sure how many people's here. Has there been a record been taken, Brother Mark? Is a record being taken up tonight? You have to. You have the people here. We're here. That young man sitting up there represents my sons. I have a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old that is in this situation right now. Whereas we can look outside of our window and see foreign workers going to work while he goes to the rocks to fish, which is not a bad thing. But it is something that pulls down their self-esteem, like the lady has stated earlier. The people are here. We have to sign something. We have to We have to commit ourselves to that young man up there, to this baby right here. Our sons and our daughters, our future. We have to commit because they're already trying to commit to themselves, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. We have to take the same responsibility on ourselves. No one has the right to tell you what to do, especially in your own country. But they're banking on how we reacted in the past.
Thank you.
We cannot be those people again. In 1998, we woke up. Something happened. Then we went to sleep again. We have to wake up. And you have to be constantly awake. You cannot sleep because they don't sleep. When you're sleeping, they're up. Okay? Scheming. They are playing chess with our lives. And right now, they have hit checkmate. Because Dunkley is in power. Gibbons is in power. We may not see the Trimminghams, but they're in power. You have to recognize who we are and where we are. There have been too many lives wrecked because of sleeping giants. I see a Rhodes Scholar in our midst today. And I don't know how he feels. I don't know how Dr. Eva Hudson feels by all that woman had put forward in a little book that wrecked her life. Not just by people of the opposition or people in power at that time, but by us. We separated ourselves. Okay, this is the honest truth, and it hurts to read this. It hurts to listen to it. I was listening to a story today where a woman said that she had to change her clothes when she went to A.S. Cooper's. They sent her into the mop room. Her and her mama had to go in the mop room to put their clothes on. Okay? We cannot allow this to happen again. It may not be a mop room, but your children won't earn property. Your children won't get educated. And not just this fly-by-night stuff that they're still putting on us, because there's no civics in school. I don't know if you know that. Okay? They're not teaching us about each one of these gentlemen up there. You ask a young man or a woman who's 16 and under who Walton Brown is, who Michael Scott is, who Rolf Commission is, who Mark Bean, well, possibly Mark Bean, because he's on Facebook. And he answers people. But you ask them, who are your leaders? They don't know. They don't know a generation behind them. We have to be responsible. We cannot go to sleep. And I charge each one of us to wake up. Wake up. Please.
Thank you all while the microphone's getting sorted. I see
Yes.
MP Brown trying to get to attention.
We were planning to wrap this up at 7:30, but if there are maybe one or two other questions, and then we can wrap it up. Let me just say in response to the lady who just sat down, every single major change that took place in this country took place because people were mobilized. From Dr. Gordon and the BWA, trade union rights, the struggle for desegregation, the struggle for the vote, the massive first general strike in 1981, all of that brought about fundamental change because people were mobilized. We're here, we sit in Parliament, and perhaps Mr. Hill will at some point too. We here sit in Parliament, we pass laws, but we're put there by you. All the power rests with you. And so you can be assured that this is the first meeting, and we will continue. We're not here just to talk. We're going to act to achieve our objective.
Good evening, everyone. One of my questions was what Mr. Brown had just said. Panelists, good evening. The PLP, good evening. To everyone, good evening. I grew up in the 50s. A lot of disparity. Racism rampant. My mom would be one to say that everything is okay, and it isn't. The 70s, it looked like we were coming together with our peace signs, our afros. We seem to have moved away from the core of our existence.
True.
As I drove down this evening from Southampton and I approached the gate, my heart sank. I'm like, where are more of the people? I expected there to be thousands of cars. But I heard the lady say earlier, we're here and we are going to start to get that ball rolling. Nelson Mandela said, poverty is man-made. As the years of my existence roll by, I am noticing, especially in recent years, more and more of my people sinking into poverty, oppression, fading away from mingling with people in the public. It is getting worse.
Yes.
When I hear of HSBC sending away some people, the Bank of Butterfield has done it. My daughter, and I'm going to speak it, she worked for Braun & Co. She was the marketing brand manager. She has a bachelor's degree. White foreigner. Belittled her for 6 months. I kept empowering her with strategies, suggestions to help her to become successful. I've just come back from Boston today. She was with me during my ordeal in Boston. Everything is fine. She is currently unemployed with a degree. I look at the sheet about the myths and that disparity in pay. Many of us are, all of us are just as intelligent, just as skilled.
Even more.
Or even more so. I've retired from education. Even though I've moved on, I'm still here for my people. To the PLP, united we stand, divided we fall. I heard what Walter Lister said minutes ago. I don't see you. He's gone. I'm standing with him too, right beside the PLP. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are actually going to have one last presenter for the evening, but this is not the first and last experience that we are going to have. There will be more meetings. We certainly need the energy to be ramped up. We need to have mobilization, we need to have critical thought, and we need to have a coming of minds come together for purpose and soul. So please tell everyone about the experience tonight. Be mindful and be looking out for the next meetings so that we can advance our agenda for our people and our future generations.
Yeah, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Just real fast, just 2 points that I think I would like to just bring forward. One's actually very much connected to what the Senator just shared. The first one's got to do with the idea of the propaganda that's being spread by the OBA around this idea of citizenship for PRCs. Particularly if you look at it from a lot of the information coming out of the OBA camp, one would think or get the impression that the PLP are completely against any PRCs getting any form of status or gaining any sorts of rights in Bermuda. The fact that we've had, in this particular setting, 2 people who are very much in favor of granting some type of broader rights and whatnot to PRCs speak up and actually find support for their positions, or at least sympathy for their positions, again, goes against what's constantly being fed to the public about what they think or what are the perceived PLP's perspectives. So with that being said, one of our major tasks, even from leaving here before another forum is organized, is that everyone in this room goes back to their own friends and family and spreads the appropriate and true message of the PLP. Not that they are an all or none, that folks shouldn't get citizenship or status, but that it should be a well thought out plan and that a loophole shouldn't be exploited for ultimately political gains. We have to realize that this notion that's being propagated by the OBA of giving away the Bermudian status, it's ultimately a political decision that they're now trying to cast in the lens of human rights, that it's a human rights issue, and also within the cast of that, again, that the PLP are xenophobic. Again, this is just false propaganda that we, within our own individual circles, need to go through and dispel. And tell them that indeed, as has already been expressed, that it was the PLP government that actually gave the whole permanent residence certificate to persons who had been here for the extended periods of time. And also to those persons that find themselves in that precarious situation of having been here but not really gaining the status. Again, if you put it in the appropriate context, when their parents came here under whichever conditions they came here, they were aware of the circumstances. These young people have been educated here, raised here, and indeed through their education and their own intelligence, we learn about things such as democracy, but we cannot jump up in 2014 and start espousing things like this is an anti-democratic country or the policies of PLP are anti-democratic when that completely takes it out of context. We have to look at these things in their appropriate context. So again, the gentleman that came up here and spoke, again, expressed that he felt as though that Bermuda was an undemocratic place. But again, if we look at it in the proper context, when your parents moved here, they knew the situation. Indeed, you were raised here and you have the intelligence to know what democracy is and what democracy is about, but let's just keep it in proper context. That's our job, to go out and present our message within its appropriate and proper context. Now, my next point, very briefly, actually goes to something that has been reverberated throughout this discussion. The importance of knowing history and understanding how history is connected to the present day. We heard one young lady stand up and speak to us about the significance and the importance and the lessons that are in Dr. Eva Hudson's book. Likewise, Mr. Walter Brown, his recently published book, he highlights the fact that Bermuda, as opposed to many other British colonies, let's say to the south in the Caribbean, was established as a settler colony. Now, ask yourselves, who were the settlers that they were setting up this country for? Were they the settlers that looked like us in this room? Or were they some other group of settlers? So now let's bring it to today and look at this whole idea of the people that are in power, who in 2002 and prior were the exact same people that were part of the the UBP, but now they're back in power, the same names, but just a different brand. And you have to ask, with granting the immediate granting of our status to the 6,000 or so PRC holders, again, who would that benefit? The whole idea that the island was established as a settler colony for what group? Who are they empowering by opening up rights such as voting in 2004? To further secure Bermuda as being that settler colony, that model colony that was instituted back in the 1800s. So I just ask us all to go back to our own respective corners and spread the true message of what the PLP is putting forth. Know that they're not completely against status granting, but let's think this through and let's make the right decision. And also, as has been expressed, it is indeed a time for us to do more than talking, but indeed to stand up and let our faces be seen. Thank you.
Brother Sherlock. Thank you to everyone who has come out tonight. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to the parliamentary group. Thank you to our former leaders, our current leader, the opposition leader and party leader, Mark Bean. Have a good night. Be ready for more. There will be more.
And all I want to say is that
Newest member of the PLP.
The struggle continues. We'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir.
Good job.